Hello and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast where we help you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and round 12 of the AFL season is in the rear-view mirror. And I'll be honest, for some of us, that's probably where we want to stay. It was tough going at times in the fantasy world in round 12 as we navigated through the first of five bye rounds. We only saw 3 players score above 130 for the round as 4 sides sat out: the Blues, the Roos, the Power and the Bulldogs. How did your league handle the byes? Both the keeper leagues I'm in have gone with the best 15 scores approach out of 18. And there is some relief this round with only the Dockers and the Saints having the bye in round 13. In terms of the footy itself, I thought it was another entertaining round, starting with Essendon nearly pulling off the most unlikely of comebacks on Thursday night against Brisbane. The Tigers couldn't hold off the fast-finishing Giants, and they just fell short. And my Crows flexed hard with a massive win over the Swans in the Harbour City, which was pretty fantastic, I'm not going to lie. The only shame of it was I was in Sydney for work over the weekend, but couldn't get to the game because I had a work event Saturday night. So that would have been nice if I could have got along to that one. I don't know why it felt like it was a rough week. Maybe it's because I didn't go so well in the classic formats. I just feel like there were a lot of tough scores to swallow across the weekend, and I just found myself a touch frustrated across the round, but that's the game. So this week on Finders Keepers, I'm going to run through what I noticed across the round from a keeper league perspective, of course. Then I'll roll into my top 5 waiver picks, as well as going a little deeper for those leagues that are so deep that finding gold on the waiver wire is really hard yakka. So hopefully I can help you with there. Now, I don't have any listener questions or trades sent in this week, so I'll probably finish the episode just going over a few trades that have gone down in the last month or so in my home league, including one that I did that was pretty good straight up, and in the weeks following has looked uglier and uglier. So I'll go through that a bit later. And then I'm hoping to talk a little bit about the bye rounds and the strategy that goes into them, because every league's different, as we know, but the byes are a really good time to pick up players that would not have otherwise been discarded because those players are on the bye. So I'll go through a little bit of that to wrap up the episode. But let's get started with what I noticed across the round, and geez, it couldn't have started any better for me as a Hugh McCluggage owner. On Thursday night, he kicked off the round in fine fashion, and he is this week's Finders Keepers Player of the Week. Against the Bombers, he racked up 41 disposals made of 20 kicks, 21 handballs, 11 marks, 4 tackles, and 152 points to top score for the round in the first game of the round. And we've seen McCluggage pop big scores like this before, but I think what stands out about him this year is the consistency. He's really becoming quite trustworthy as a solid primo, not just a guy that will occasionally give you a big score, but you generally just expect 90s. So it's been great to have him myself this year, and other owners I'm sure would agree. Another guy for the Lions, Kai Lohmann. It was just great to see him start to hit a little bit of last season's form. He's had such a shocking run with injury and therefore form since he's come back. It's been a real stop-start season for Lohmann, but this was a great performance. He kicked 3 goals, and he would have had owners very nervous early because he did run down the race just before quarter time with what looked like being maybe a game-ending injury, but he came back on and had a great score. So I think he's well on the way back to being a pretty handy guy to have in the forward line. For the Bombers, Jai Caldwell has gone back-to-back 120-plus scores, and he's really returning to that early season form that we saw before his injury setback. He had a massive third quarter with 16 touches, and he is just looking fantastic. It's a great season for him because last year he did this and he had the forward status, which was great. But to be able to consolidate on the back of a breakout season and go on with it, I think is a really good sign for someone who's still so young. For Essendon as well, I mean, we saw a huge change to Zach Merritt's role. We've seen him float in the backline in the past, but this was significant role change, almost like Connor Rosie's change about 6 weeks ago. So Merritt had 14% centre bounce attendances, and that's his lowest since round 2, 2020. Played halfback, took the most kick-ins. And I guess the question is, well, there's two questions. One, how did he look in the role? And two, does the role stick? Now, he scored 94, and I think he can score much more than that in the role if it continues. And I guess some of the commentators were saying, well, not the commentators, but some of the commentary around it has been, why wouldn't you have Merritt, your best player, around the ball in the midfield? But I kind of thought this was a year that Merritt might regress slightly as the Bombers look to put him in different positions, with the reason being that the Essendon midfield, that they've got a heap coming through. And if you look at the CBAs for this game, Perkins, Nick Martin, Centerfield all had an increase in CBAs, and Durham rolled his ankle, so he played more forward. But the Bombers have got so many guys like that, and don't forget Darcy Parish isn't far off returning from his injury problems. Guys like Ben Hobbs keeps getting stuck on a half-forward flank. Elijah Sardis can't seem to hold his spot. They've got a lot of mids coming through, and I think it makes sense for Merritt to move out and play in a role that, you know, he can still impact by being a calming influence in that back line. It makes sense to me, especially with the Bombers' defensive injuries, and I actually think it will stick for a little bit moving forward. Angus Clark, just quickly, in his second game, different role to last week, played more on the wing, and even though he scored, I think it was a 42, which is obviously nowhere near the heights of the week before, I actually liked what I saw, and I liked the fact that they played him up the ground. I said last week's episode, I wasn't sure what sort of player he was going to be, and I think we got more of an idea, and it's more of a fantasy-friendly role. So I didn't mind seeing that. On to Friday night footy, and we saw Collingwood and Hawthorn, and I was pretty excited for this game, but unfortunately the Hawks just couldn't go with the Pies, and Collingwood are looking more and more formidable as the weeks roll on. For Hawthorn, I think we saw a nice little spike for Josh Ward's CBAs, just with Cam McKenzie out of the side, and it was his best score since round 7 with an 85. Feels like it's been a bit of a slow burn for Josh Ward owners, but I think it's getting there. And I think as time goes on, we will see a bit more of him on the inside, and his scoring's going to be reflecting that in a positive way. Now, James Sicily, we have to talk. There was a bit I saw of pushback from Hawthorn people. I can't think of who. I know the coach stood up for him, and other people were a bit frustrated with the criticism on James Sicily's form. And I don't really know why, because he's out of form and he's the captain of the club. And the club, you know, Hawks, they've had a flat few weeks. So I think the criticism has been completely fine. Maybe the extra criticism of his leadership and all that, yeah, I don't buy into that. But this guy, he just can't get near the pill, and he can't influence games. So on the weekend, he scored 20 from 89% time on ground. He spent the second half as a forward, but 20 from a full game is brutal for anyone fielding him. May have been me in one of my leagues. But it's just, yeah, the Hawks need him to step up and get involved in the game, because he's the leader and he is much better than his last few weeks would suggest. Jack Ginnivan, though, 31 touches and turned it on against his old side, which he does tend to do. He slowed in the second half, as did the rest of the Hawks, but his form since round 6 dropping to the VFL has just been amazing. And I think I've said it a few times, but since then, it's been 6 games. 4 of them he scored 90 plus, including 3 tons. He's just becoming a really solid scorer, and he's a great player to watch. He obviously, likes to stir the opposition and stir the crowd, but it's good entertainment, and he's a really good player too. For Collingwood, I can't remember a side with so many old players who are just still playing at the level. And I know Geelong had a very old side that won the flag a few years ago, but I just look at Collingwood. They've got, Pendlebury, Crisp, Darcy Moore, Jamie Elliott is in rare form. And the guy I'm talking about now, Steele Sidebottom, is having a killer season. He's averaging 91. It's incredible, and it's a big reason why Collingwood are very much the flag favourites now. Tom Mitchell is building in the VFL. He had a good game on the weekend. I don't know how they get him into the side just yet, but we will see him again soon, I reckon. Maybe it's in a sub role, but the thought of Tom Mitchell returning to the game is pretty exciting. Ed Allen is one of their younger guys who not only kept his spot in the side from last week, but he backed it up. He had a really good game last week, and my concern was he may make way for, a lot of ins that return to the Pies side. But no, he kept his spot and put up another good score. So he's really starting to come on. I think he's played 4 or 5 games in a row now. So hopefully he can stay in the side. Because, the thing with Collingwood is they've got all these old guys, but at some point the old guys move on and you need that young group to step up. And, they're just quite sneakily developing a few younger guys, Collingwood, and it's going to hold them in good stead. On Saturday, we saw the Dockers put in a really, really good game, an important win for them. To beat the Suns on the road just shows that their season's definitely still got plenty in it. For Gold Coast, I thought there was some signs of life for Sam Flanders, who's been just awful in fantasy this year. And he had a 58-point second half, so he only scored 75 total, but it just looked like he was more around the ball. It looked like they used him a little bit more like we saw last year. He kicked a really cool goal. If you haven't seen that, go and check it out off the ground in the wet. So I don't know what this means, but Flanders owners will be having a hard time. I just think there was some signs on the weekend that maybe he can get back to it. Leo Lombard had a very exciting debut and an even more exciting first goal celebration, which I just thought was awesome to see. He was pretty highly touted in pre-season for keeper leagues, and that long-term shoulder injuries just kept him out of it. I didn't actually think he'd work his way in for a debut so soon from returning from that injury, but he did. He was subbed off in the 4th quarter, and I hope he did enough to keep his spot, but I'm not sure. We'll have to wait and see. For Freo, Luke Jackson thrived, even with Darcy back in the side. He's just been someone who for so long has been, when Darcy's out injured, Luke Jackson can be your man. And because Darcy's been injured so much the last few years, we've got plenty of data to back that up. But on the weekend, he was everywhere. They had a 50-50 split for ruck contests around the field. And what was really exciting, I think, for Jackson owners is when Darcy was the ruck, there was still times where Jackson would attend the set of bounces as a midfielder with Darcy. So, I'd be really excited if I owned Luke Jackson, because I think he's starting to carve out a path to being a fantasy gun with or without Darcy. And I think that's, it's pretty exciting. Neil Erasmus, gave owners a score to hang their hat on with an 80. For a couple of weeks, he'd had the role. Freo were giving him a go, and it just wasn't scoring. But to get an 80 on the weekend, he just continues to build. And I think that midfield role is starting to look a bit more secure. There's some other guys that will be back. Obviously, Hayden Young is a fair way off. Nathan O'Driscoll is right on the cusp of breaking back into the side. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. But I think Erasmus owners can be pretty happy that it's been a few weeks with the role and now he's got a decent score to go with it. Nat Fyfe was back. Great to see him back. Came on as the sub and I think had around 7 touches, scored 20-odd points. Just did, his usual Nat Fyfe stuff. But interestingly, in terms of Freo's structure, he pushed Shai Bolton out of the CBAs in the last quarter. He had none and Fyfe picked them up. So, yeah, I don't know. I reckon they'll use Fyfe as a sub a little bit until he's back to full fitness. And, if he can get back to full fitness, let's just see if Nat Fyfe can't give us one last hurrah in what's been an incredible career. Over to the Giants and the Tigers, and I caught the last 10 minutes of this game, I reckon, but I was tracking the scores and I'm sure like many, I kept doing a double take when I saw that Richmond were just owning them on the scoreboard. And it wasn't even a case of, Richmond are kicking straight, Giants are missing. No, from what I saw, Richmond were dominating. They had all the scoring shots and, just this young Richmond side continues to put together, not always full games, but periods of games that just are beyond their years. But unfortunately for them and fortunately for GWS, they just came home and the Tigers ran out of gas in the last quarter and just lost. But Dion Prestia, welcome back, Meatball. What a return match for him. And, Tigers will just be hoping like anything he can stay fit. 31 touches and a goal, just to remind the football world that, yes, he's, a bit older these days and he's quite often in the rehab room with his injuries. But, geez, when he plays, and he plays like that, he's a bloody good player. So good to see that for the Tigers. Kane McAuliffe seemingly was impacted by the Prestia return, which many had flagged, but I didn't think that would be the case. I thought McAuliffe had done enough in the previous 2 weeks to say he needs to play and be at the coalface. He just had a quiet game because his CBAs were similar. He had a bit of a drop in his time on ground, but he just couldn't get near the ball and wasn't laying any tackles. He had a pretty good third quarter, which really saved his score of 55 in the end. And, pretty disappointing. I reckon he'll bounce back, though. I'd be surprised if he didn't. Tim Taranto has got a bit of a pattern at the minute, which is big starts to games and then fades. This week showed that more than ever. He had a huge first quarter, 11 touches and 2 goals. I think he was on 53 fantasy points. Then Bedford went to him after quarter time and completely shut him down after that, and he only added another 38 points for the game. It's really disappointing because he is a guy who, he should be scoring tons most weeks. He's got the role. He's got the ability. I know he plays in a side that aren't going to be big scorers, but I just don't understand why he keeps fading away in second halves. And I think Richmond needed him to step up, particularly in that last quarter when the Giants came home strong. So, I don't know. I want to see a bit more from Taranto. He's got a lot more to give than what he's doing at the moment. For GWS, Lockie Whitfield owners would have been a little bit nervous seeing him start forward again, but I just can't stress this enough. It's not an issue. He reminds me of Nick Martin. Whether he's forward or back, he finds the ball. He ended up going back in the second half and, posted another big score, 119, I think it was. He took kick-ins again, which he didn't last week. But he just scores. Even as a half forward, he's getting up the ground and finding it. So I'm not worried about it. In fact, in a in a perfect world, he ends up with forward status next year, just like Nick Martin has done. So that would be something. I don't think it happens. I just think that the Giants are moving him a little bit up to let Lockie Ash continue to flourish, and he has. And then this next guy, Joe Fonte, who put up another really good showing of just what he can become as a defender off half-back. He laid 6 tackles on the way to an 86. And, I don't know. I just reckon Whitfield up the ground a bit more means Fonte can start to develop into that role as well, which I think is pretty exciting. Xavier O'Halloran, look, the role remained as it had last week, and he's still that defensive mid, but unfortunately, when you play in that role, kind of like Harry Perryman when he goes into the midfield at Collingwood, it's not always a very good scoring role, even with CBAs. But with forward status and, keeping that role, I think he's still going to be pretty handy. Josh Kelly returned, and I was really interested to see what his role would be and how that would impact the midfield. And he just played on a wing. He didn't have any centre bounce attendances for the game, which I think is good news for some of those other guys like O'Halloran. Sydney Adelaide was, pretty surprising result with the Crows just dominating pretty much from the start. One of the more interesting things over the weekend was the fact that Adelaide, had a huge win, 90-point win, and didn't have a single player register a fantasy ton. I couldn't believe it when I saw this at the end. Not one of them. Thilthorpe was on 87 at three-quarter time when he was subbed, so you think he would have got there. But no one did. It was such an even spread performance. And, I just thought that was really interesting. A couple of guys, Sam Berry, I was a little bit disappointed with his scoring this week, just after how exciting last week was. But he had the same role. He was in the middle and then he was forward. So it was the same role as what got him the 120 last week. He just was a lot quieter, and I don't actually think he took a mark for the game. So, I reckon he'll be okay. Let's have another look at him this week up against, that really strong Brisbane midfield, which will test him, no doubt. Wayne Miller has put up another strong score, and, I've talked about him on and off this year. I just think he's starting to look more trustworthy on your field now. And his time on ground was up to 87%, which is his highest this season. It's great to see. Watching him as well, there's just so much more confidence in him and that strength to shrug tackles and continue the play. I saw a lot of that on the weekend, and it's exciting because he's a very good player, Miller, and he's just never had the run at that continuity with his body. So fingers crossed it continues. For Sydney, Brodie Grundy, he put his hand up in a poor loss, but he did everything he could. He's actually got 4 tons in a row now. He's in hot form, and it's really good to see. I think I spoke about him last week, but he just keeps doing it. And another pretty big ton this week. It's it's good for those owners who certainly had thought maybe the days of his tons were behind us. Angus Sheldrick, a very popular guy on this podcast, as you know, it's now 3 scores in the 80s in a row, and his time on ground is increasing every week. So I think this is great news for Sheldrick owners. I think even with Mills back, he should be back again this week. And, guys like Goulden. I was trying to work out all the players they're missing earlier today. They've got a few missing. I just think Sheldrick's in now, and I think he's got that role. So it's pretty good to see. Riley Bice, on the other hand, has been fantastic this season, but I think after this effort, we surely see him get a spell in the twos. He's been on the decline for a few weeks now, and this week, just 2 disposals in the first half, and then subbed out of the game. I think he'll do well to get some confidence in the twos, and then he'll be back at some point. Justin McInerney returned. and depending on which DPPs you use, he's just picked up forward status. So it was a great time for him to return to the side and post a 90 with his forward status. Yeah, he's going to be pretty handy to have for the second half of the year. On to the two games on Sunday. We saw St Kilda go up to Alice Springs, I think it was, and knock off the Demons, who kicked something like 7 goals 20. So, yeah, not a great one for Melbourne fans. I didn't see any of this game, so I'm really just going off what the numbers tell me. And the numbers tell me that Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller is just fast becoming one of the best fantasy players in the game. And I say this because at halftime, he'd had a head knock in the second quarter, but he'd been really quiet the whole first half. And as a person who doesn't own him across any leagues, whether it be classic, draft, keeper, I don't own him anywhere. It was just nice to see him on a pretty crap score at halftime. Well, that didn't last long. He came out with a 96-point second half and delivered yet another ton to the very, very happy owners. He's just a gun. Marcus Windhager's seen a nice return to the midfield in recent weeks, and I think it's been great. I said last week I was surprised the Saints didn't do this a bit earlier. It's kind of taken that Jack Macrae injury to get him back in there, but he scored really well, and from what I can see, he was on Pickett, Cozzy Pickett, and I don't know if it was a hard tag exactly, but I do know that Windhager is a very good tagger, and Keziah Pickett had one of his poorer games scoring-wise for some time. Hunter Clark got through another game, 76% time on ground. It's a really good number for him, and another good score. So it's, like I said last week with Clark, he's still young enough and he's definitely good enough. So hopefully he can continue with it. Now, Hugh Boxall, I just don't understand the game sometimes and how coaches use players. And maybe it's just the fantasy hat that I'm wearing and I'm missing the obvious here. But St Kilda had an injury early in the game. It was very unfortunate. Mateus Filippo out with a calf. He should be fine after the bye, they reckon. So just for owners there. So they used their sub in the first quarter really early. And I thought, this is great for Boxall. He now gets 4 quarters to just do his thing and show that he belongs at level. And he had a very quiet game, didn't score very much, but he only had 49% time on ground. 49%, I don't understand it. In a game where St Kilda had used their sub right at the start of the game, they've got a player that's literally only played, half of the game. The other half he's just on the bench. So I don't know. I know I'm a broken record with this stuff. I've been saying it for weeks. I don't understand why you would play someone if they're not ready to play a game and only put them in for half the game. Anyway, maybe Saints fans have more of an idea of what the story is, because if he's got limitations and he's not at the level yet, play him in the VFL. Just let him play in the VFL until he's ready. Anyway, enough of that. Melbourne, look, the only thing that really stood out to me was Bailey Fritsch. Another great game from him in fantasy scoring. He's really responded to being the sub in that round 10 game, and he's gone... Well, in that sub game, round 10, he went in the last quarter. He came on and scored really well and maybe even helped them win the game. I can't remember the story. And then since then, a 76 and an 82. Really good scores. So he's back, Fritsch, back as someone that is, relevant for forward lines. And he may feature in my waiver pickups a little later as well. The last game, Sunday night. How good is Sunday night footy? I know I've said it before, but I just love it because I've got kids and I don't watch a lot of footy during the day, and the twilight games are really hard. So to have a night game on the Sunday, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, Bring it on. I love it. Hopefully there's more of it. There is this week, actually. This Sunday night there'll be a game. Anyway, was it a good game? It was in the end. I thought there was a chance it would be quite a boring affair. But no, West Coast, they made Geelong earn it and put in a good effort. So it was a good game. For Geelong, Mitch Duncan, that was probably his best game since he's come back into the side. He was involved in everything early and appeared to be off half back, which is the role we want for him to score in. And I still think he'll be used on the wing as well. So we're not going to see big scores from him as frequently as in the past, but to get a 90 in this game is good signs. Brian Myers is having a huge 4 weeks at the moment. He's having a big year, and he's pretty underrated probably in the fantasy world, to be fair. But his last 4 weeks, he hasn't dropped under 94. And on the weekend, 137, thanks to 13 marks. It's very impressive. Yeah, he just finds the ball, doesn't he, in that half-forward role and hits the scoreboard. He's a great player to have. I reckon you'd be pretty happy, particularly in the last 4 weeks, but if you'd had him all year as well. Now, speaking of happy owners, Bailey Smith owners had to sit through 2024 with him on the sideline, waiting to see where does he go, because we knew he probably was leaving the Bulldogs. So once he got to Geelong, there would have been some, not concern, but, I don't think we were absolutely sure it was a guarantee he'd be a fantasy jet playing at Geelong. Because, as good as Geelong have been in the real stuff, they haven't had a player average over 100 in fantasy since 2021 with Cam Guthrie. But Bailey Smith is changing that. He is having a year to remember, and another whopping score on the weekend takes his average over 120 for the season. He's been amazing. He had 25 touches in the first half before I think Hoff went to him and just tried to nullify him as much as he could, and Smith ended up with 38. But he's the best fantasy player in the game right now, and owners would be thinking that 12 months of waiting was well and truly worth it. Jeremy Cameron continues his great run since Paddy Dangerfield went down, and I'd say it's because his role has just been much more what we're used to seeing with Cameron, in playing more of a forward role. Because when Danger was playing, he was a forward, obviously, Jezza, but he was playing up the ground, he was playing a bit of wing, and I think now that he's closer to goal, the results have been something. He's now got 3 tons in a row, and he's kicked 18 goals in that time. But credit to Jinby for the Eagles, who really did a number on Cameron for the first probably 3.5 quarters. He was well held, Cameron, and really it wasn't till that last quarter when he broke the game open and put up, what did he do? He kicked 4 goals in the last quarter and scored 61 fantasy points to get him to the ton. So, Jinby did a great job for 3.5 quarters, but, I think the commentator made the point that if that pressure on the Geelong midfield isn't what it was for the first 3 quarters, there's no one in the league that can stop Jezza. For the Eagles, Matty Flynn got his chance to ruck solo with Williams out, and I thought he was pretty decent up against Stanley, who is, a bit of a trickier opponent than you'd think these days. But Flynn scored a 99, which is his 4th score over 90. He's just yet to hit the ton this season, but I reckon it's coming. Speaking of coming, Elijah Hewitt, he just continues to build, continues to improve. And, watching this game, I really like what I'm seeing. You can really start to see what we've heard about this kid for so long. And it's great to see. He's got that midfield role. He pushes forward. He hits the scoreboard. And he's just going to grow in confidence the more he plays. Ryan Marrick played more on the wing this week, and he actually took 0 kick-ins for the first time this season. So I'm not quite sure why the Eagles are moving that around. I thought he was doing pretty good in the role. Last couple of weeks it's changed a bit, and he ended up being subbed out at 3/4 time. I noticed that Tyler Dewar is getting got an opportunity on the weekend to take some kick-ins, so I don't know why they're moving things around. I would have thought with McGovern out, Marek was a pretty safe play, but yeah, it looks like they're moving him up the ground. And lastly, for West Coast, we did have our mid-season draft last week, and West Coast with pick 1 took Tom McCarthy, who put up a pretty big game in the waffle, and we may see this guy as early as this week. And the role that's been pegged is, I think I saw midfield and halfback. So think distribution type role. So if Marek is out of the way and McCarthy comes in, so we're putting a lot on this guy. He hasn't even played yet, but I don't know. I reckon there's a fantasy guy there ready to debut. And for those that jumped on super early last week, you might not have to wait too long to see him. All right, it's time for my top waiver wire pickups for this week. And I reckon there's not a heap this week. Last week I feel like there were heaps, but yeah, it's a little bit trickier this week. Before I do look at my top 5 for the week, let's look at how I went last week with the players I suggested. So I started with Riley Hardiman, who was on the bye, so obviously we don't have an answer for that one, but I'm fairly confident anyone who grabbed him will be feeling pretty good about that. Sam Berry was the other one I put up, and yeah, as I said earlier, the scoring was nowhere near the levels of last week, but importantly the role was the same, and I think he's going to be okay. Another guy I did was Dylan Stevens, who was also on the bye, so we'll wait and see how he plays this week. Hunter Clark is someone I suggested, and he backed up his performance with another pretty good score, I reckon in the 80s. And then the last one was Xavier O'Halloran, who I did recommend, but like I said earlier, playing in that defensive mid role means the scoring isn't always going to be there. Something that would be pleasing for owners though, Josh Kelly came back into the side but didn't play in the midfield. And I think that's a good sign for O'Halloran's job security, role security more than anything. All right, this week, who should you grab? Let's see. Dion Prestia. Yes, he's injury prone. Yes, he's 32, but he can play. And finding midfielders, those pure mids, finding one of them on the waivers is hard. It's absolutely gold to get a mid that you can just plug in at M5, M6, whatever it may be. And I think Prestia is definitely worth a pick based on that performance. Joe Fonte is worth grabbing for your bench at least. He's not going to put up a big 86 like he did on the weekend every week, but I really like what I'm seeing with him. I like what his role appears to be developing into, and I think for a keeper league, grabbing him and just putting him to the side for now is definitely worth doing. Kai Lohman is probably another guy that you could just grab maybe just for the bench for now and just see if he can keep building on that performance. He plays Friday night this week, so he is a perfect loop option. Bailey Fritsch, I think, should be a pretty handy F5 for the rest of the season if you can swing it. He has, been nowhere near the level up until recently, but last few weeks, much better, and he can score. It doesn't necessarily have to kick a bag to score either. And then the last one is Logan Evans, who might just be sitting and available after Port had the bye. He just had a really nice score before the bye, and I think, we saw in the back half of last year when he debuted and came in, he's a really good scorer if he gets the role, and the role is there for him because Port have got so many injuries back there. I think he could be pretty good. He just has to get that consistency, and he has to get those awful low basement scores out of his game because they could be, they're killers if you cop that during the round. So there's my 5 for the week, but what if you're playing in a really deep league and all the guys I just mentioned are already owned? let's go a little deeper and look at 5 players that maybe you could grab in a super deep league. The first one is Caleb Mitchell for Sydney. It was his first game of the season and his third for his career. He scored 51 points playing on the wing and looked like he was a little bit behind the ball at half-back at times. But what stood out to me is that he had 92% time on ground, which is a really big number for a young player. And with, I reckon, Bice probably going to be out of the side this week for a rest. And Sydney, at this stage, looking at maybe the season being done and there's more of a reason to play these kids, I reckon he could get a bit of a run in the side. And yeah, 51's pretty good in a side that got beaten by 15 goals. Looking forward to seeing him again this week. For the Giants, Toby McMullen has had an uptick in CBAs the last few weeks and scored a 71, which I think is promising. He missed last week, didn't he? But yeah, the few weeks before that, he was just starting to get a role in the middle. And I don't think he's going to be a massive scorer, but with forward status, I think he's worth a punt. Isaac Keeler for St Kilda, he has forward status. He was really impressive on the weekend. When he played earlier in the season, he played as a bit of a backup to Marshall, and his scoring was terrible. But the last 2 weeks, he hasn't really been in that role. And on the weekend, he kicked a few goals early, I think, which beefed up his score, but he was on track for a really good score. I reckon he's worth grabbing to have a look at. Logan Morris for Brisbane, he put up a really big score, 85, thanks to 9 marks. I just think he'd be available because he hasn't really had any big scores so far, and he's a key forward, of course, but for a second-year key forward, he is looking good. And it was a real standout game on Thursday night. So I reckon he'll be pretty popular in those deeper leagues, and I think he's worth investing in. And it's the same with Patrick Voss for Freo. He's someone that I've been noticing for a while when I watch Freo, and just, I don't know, I like the way he plays. I think he's got, you can just see he's going to be a really good player down the line. But before the weekend, he'd never really put up a fantasy score. So 77 from 3 goals in a really important win for Freo. I think he is worth a shout as well. Now, as I said earlier, no listener questions this week. So don't forget, if you've got a thought, if you've got a question about keeper leagues, or even better, if you've got a trade that's gone through in a keeper league you play in and you want me to analyse it for you on the podcast, send it through. Don't be shy. Find me on X at FindKeepAFL. You can post it on the wall, or you can send me a DM, and you can remain anonymous too if you're asking a question that you don't want your fellow coaches to know that it was you. So yes, let's see some questions come through this week. So in the absence of any questions, I thought I'd do a bit of a quick look at some trades that have gone down in my keeper league, my home league, in the last, last month or so. And for context, this is an 8-team league. We have 30 on field, and we keep 20 every year, delisting 10. So let's have a look at... All right, here's the one I did. This was back on the 30th of April, and I've just been chasing a defender all year, just someone solid that can help, because I'm finding it really hard to field reliable defenders this year. And my midfield's pretty strong. I've got a good young core group, including Jai Caldwell. So I had Sam Durham, who I'm a real big fan of. I've really enjoyed having him. I think he's got a big future. But I just sort of thought, if I could turn him into a decent enough defender to help me this year, because I am challenging, I'm at the pointy end of the table, which is nice, could I turn Durham into a defender? So I ended up trading him. It was a straight player-for-player swap with a side in my league, the Infinity Rangers, and in exchange for Sam Durham, I got James Sicily. And I was pretty happy at the time with this because, like I said, I felt like I could live without Durham, and Sicily at that point hadn't had any big scores, but he was pretty consistent with 80s as a minimum. The first week I had him, he scored a ton and life was good. But since then, he's gone back-to-back 50s and then that awful 20 on the weekend. So I'm pretty filthy with him at the moment. I can't even put him on the field. I'll be able to loop him this week, being a Thursday. And Durham's looked really good, I reckon. On the weekend, he rolled his ankle and had a poor score. But apart from that, he's looked pretty solid every week. So I don't know if I'm regretting the trade as such, but I'm certainly getting frustrated with Sicily. He's not holding up his end of the bargain. And maybe that's why I was so harsh on him when I was talking about him earlier. Because, this is why I've never been a big Sicily fan. Is that he's good, but man, is his bad ugly. So we'll see if he can bounce back and help me out on the second half of the year. Another trade that went through on the 6th of May was between Pure Pace and Kung Fu Sanders. Kung Fu Sanders gave up Mateus Filippo and a late pick in exchange for a first round and a second round pick. And a lot of the other guys in the league thought that was really good business to turn Filippo into those two picks, a first and a second round. And the side he traded with is looking like missing finals. So there should be some pretty good picks that he gets. But I just couldn't believe he was willing to let Filippo go. I'm such a big fan of his. How he looked last year, at the back end of last year when he was playing midfield, for his age, I just thought, what a future this guy's got. He's got forward status. And so anyway, since then, Filippo has come back and been pretty underwhelming. And now he's out. Well, they reckon he'll play after the bye, but he was subbed off on the weekend. I just think he's going to be a gun in the future. And Pure Pace, the coach of that side, is actually my brother, and he's a big Crows fan, as I am. And I reckon with Filippo being a South Australian, maybe down the track he could end up being a Crow, which would make it even nicer. So Filippo and a late pick for a first and second round pick done. And then finally, the most recent one on the 20th of May, a couple of weeks ago, was between D. Wonderbolts and Kung Fu Sanders again. And this was an interesting one. The coach of the Wonderbolts, Nick, was desperate to get this trade through and approved before the waivers on a Tuesday. So it was just before 12 o'clock. And the reason was he wanted to pick up someone in the waiver pool, but he couldn't delist anyone. Well, there's no one he wanted to delist. So instead of dropping someone for nothing, he was able to pull off this last-minute trade, which was Brent Daniels out for a third-round pick. And that might seem a little light on, as in he could have asked for more, but he was desperate to sell. And Kung Fu Sanders, coached by Ray, was more than happy to throw that pick away and grab Daniels, who's out injured at the moment, but has a fair bit of potential when he comes back. So D. Wonderbolts gets the third round pick, and he got his waiver pick, which was actually Kane McAuliffe, he picked up that day. So in essence, it was giving up Brent Daniels, who's out injured, for a third round pick and the ability to get Kane McAuliffe, which he did. So another trade where both coaches walk away pretty happy, and as is always the case, it'll be hindsight that determines who won the trade. Alright, before I wrap up another big episode of Finders Keepers, I did just want to talk about the buy rounds and the strategy around buy rounds when it comes to keeper leagues. And clearly every league is going to be different depending on list size, depending on the rules you have around delistings, and even how your league scores through the buy rounds. So if you play on Keeper Fantasy, you've actually got the option of going either best 15 players or best 14 players, whatever you want it to be. But you've actually also got the option of going up and applying average score to the guys off on the buy, which is pretty cool to have those options. But I do like going with the best 15 for an 18 on-field side. And that's what we are doing in the leagues I'm in. But the bye rounds are just a really interesting time of year where, particularly if you're in a bye round where you're not affected greatly, as in you've got a pretty full side, or it may be a case of you're a rebuilding side and you're not that fussed about fielding a strong side in the byes and winning. And this is the time of year where the competing sides who are trying to keep those wins ticking over can sometimes drop players that they wouldn't ordinarily drop because they're on the bye. So last week you might have seen some fairly handy players for North Melbourne, Carlton, Port Adelaide or the Bulldogs that were dropped to the pool by a side that would have kept them ordinarily but is trying to get the W. And this is a great time for you to pounce and grab these players for free. This week, keep an eye out for St Kilda and Freo players that get dropped by coaches trying to get a full side to get the win this week, particularly if it's a player that has just had an average or poor score. So like for Fremantle, you might find the coach in your league who has Matt Johnson from Fremantle. He may have had him for a while. He's been sitting on him, hoping for his scores to get up there and wait for that opportunity. And he's been okay, Johnson. But, last week he scored a 65. He's still not getting that full inside look that, owners might be hoping for. He may be someone that just has to make way for a player on field, and you could just go and pick him up for free. And for the Saints, it could be someone like even a Ryan Burns, who I think's been pretty good this year, 73 average, coming off a 69, defender mid status. But maybe the owner of Burns in your league needs to get someone playing and he drops it. Again, you can pounce. So then when you're on the other side of it and you're thinking, do I drop this player for nothing? How badly do I need that spot on field? Who am I playing? Can I beat that person with a 0, potentially? It's really tricky because, especially if you're dropping a young asset that, you're really keen on holding, at least till the end of the year to see, and he just has to make way for you to get the win. So it's a really hard balance. Something you can do, and again, this depends on your league settings. If you have a rolling lockout, you can wait until the absolute last minute because the bye players aren't locked out till the end of the round. So you can see how you're going throughout the round in your head-to-head, and then you pull the trigger if or when you decide that, you need that extra body on field. So looking at this week, just as an example, say you have a Ryan Burns, ideally you keep him, but it may come to a stage over the weekend you need to drop him to get someone who is playing. Let's just say you're looking at the King's birthday clash, Collingwood, Melbourne. Tom McDonald is a good chance he'll be available in most leagues. You can wait all the way till Monday before making that decision. Do I need an extra body on field? If you do, sorry Burns, out you get. Tom McDonald on the field. Scored 77 last week. If he can give you another 60 plus, that's pretty all right. Or on the flip side, if you're heading into the Sunday, Monday games and you're looking like getting the win, you can just carry Burns through past his bye. I know early days playing in keeper leagues, I made the mistake of letting some pretty good players go just in the chase for a victory. And over the years, I've learned to balance it out a little bit better because a win is good, but letting go of a future gun, well, there's not enough wins, except for a premiership, that'll make you feel better about that. And with that, I think it's time we wrap up this episode of Finders Keepers. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you've got a bit out of it. And I hope you're enjoying the podcast overall. If you are, please make sure you like and subscribe wherever you're listening. And as I mentioned earlier, you can drop a line on X at FindKeepAFL. And while you're there, make sure you give the page a follow as well. That'd be great, and I'd really appreciate it. All right, so that's it for this week. I'll be back again same time next week to wrap up round 13. And I hope you have a good week. Good luck with your waiver picks. I hope you get the players you desire. And good luck in round 13. I hope all the sides you coach go well and you get a couple of wins at least. In the meantime, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers. And until next time, keep on keeping on.